A world divided, the Cold War and Vietnam. This period was marked by intense rivalry and suspicion between two superpowers. The Vietnam War was a long and brutal conflict. It was one of the most significant and devastating wars of the 20th century. It raged in the Southeast Asian nation of Vietnam from 1955 to 1975. Over these 2 decades, the war saw numerous battles and significant loss of life. The war was a proxy war. This means that it was not just a local conflict but part of a larger global struggle. This meant that it was part of a larger global struggle. The Vietnam War was deeply intertwined with the broader Cold War dynamics. This larger struggle was the Cold War. The Cold War was a period of geopolitical tension between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Cold War was an ideological battle between the United States and the Soviet Union. It was a clash of two very different worldviews and systems of governance. The US championed democracy and capitalism. They believed in free markets and individual freedoms. The Soviet Union promoted communism. They advocated for a state-controlled economy and a classless society. Vietnam became a battleground in this global struggle. The conflict drew in major powers and had far-reaching consequences. The communist North Vietnamese government, supported by the Soviet Union and China, aimed to unify the country. They were determined to spread their ideology. They opposed the US-backed government in South Vietnam. The South Vietnamese government was supported by American military and financial aid. The war had a profound impact on Vietnam, the United States, and the world. It caused immense human suffering and altered the course of history. It left an indelible mark on the political landscape. The aftermath of the war reshaped international relations and domestic policies. It also raised questions about the role of superpowers in international conflicts. The Vietnam War challenged the strategies and ethics of global intervention. The Vietnam War remains a subject of intense study and debate even today. Scholars and historians continue to analyze its causes, events, and consequences. Seeds of conflict from French Indochina to the Geneva Accords. To understand the Vietnam War, we must look back to the colonial history of Vietnam. For centuries, Vietnam had been ruled by foreign powers. In the 19th century, France colonized Vietnam. It became part of French Indochina. The Vietnamese people resented French rule. They desired independence. After World War II, Ho Chi Minh, a Vietnamese communist leader, declared Vietnam's independence. This ignited the First Indochina War, from 1946 to 1954. The Vietnamese fought against the French for their freedom. The pivotal Battle of Dien Bien Phu in 1954 marked a turning point. The Vietnamese defeated the French. This victory led to the Geneva Accords. These accords temporarily divided Vietnam into North and South. The accords also promised an election to reunify the country. America enters the fray, driven by a fear of communism spreading across the globe. This fear was encapsulated in the domino theory, a concept that shaped early involvement. The Geneva Accords offered a glimmer of hope for peace, aiming to temporarily divide Vietnam at the 17th parallel. However, Cold War tensions soon escalated the conflict, as both superpowers vied for influence in the region. The United States, fearing the spread of communism in Southeast Asia, became increasingly involved in Vietnam, seeing it as a critical battleground. The US government embraced the domino theory, believing that the fall of one nation to communism would lead to a chain reaction. This theory suggested that if one country fell to communism, neighboring countries would follow suit, like a row of falling dominoes. In 1955, the US began providing military and economic aid to South Vietnam, hoping to bolster its resistance against communist forces. The US supported Ngo Diem, the anti-communist leader of South Vietnam, despite his controversial and often repressive policies. Diem refused to hold the reunification elections promised by the Geneva Accords, fearing a communist victory. This decision further fueled tensions between North and South Vietnam, leading to increased hostilities. The US involvement in Vietnam gradually increased, moving from advisory roles to more direct military engagement. It evolved from providing aid to sending military advisors, who played a crucial role in training South Vietnamese forces. This marked the beginning of America's deep entanglement in the Vietnam War, a conflict that would last for decades and have profound impacts on both nations. The firestorm engulfs escalation and major battles from 1965 to 1968. This period saw some of the most intense and devastating conflicts of the Vietnam War, forever altering the course of history. The year 1965 marked a significant escalation in the Vietnam War. The United States began a massive military buildup, sending thousands of troops and vast amounts of equipment to Vietnam. Following the Gulf of Tonkin incident in which North Vietnamese torpedo boats allegedly attacked U.S. destroyers, President Lyndon B. Johnson authorized the deployment of U.S. combat troops to Vietnam. This incident provided the justification needed for a more aggressive military approach. This decision marked a turning point in the war. The U.S. strategy shifted from advisory and support roles to direct combat operations, leading to a dramatic increase in American involvement. The conflict transformed from a limited engagement to a full-scale war. The intensity and scale of the battles increased, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. Over the next few years, the U.S. committed hundreds of thousands of troops to the fight. The American military presence in Vietnam grew exponentially, with soldiers engaged in continuous operations. They engaged in fierce battles against the North Vietnamese Army and the Viet Cong, a communist guerrilla force in South Vietnam. These engagements were often brutal and relentless, testing the limits of both sides. The Vietnam War was fought in a challenging and unforgiving environment. The dense jungles and rugged terrain made traditional combat strategies difficult to execute. Dense jungles, humid weather, and booby traps made combat extremely dangerous. Soldiers had to constantly be on alert for hidden threats, adding to the psychological strain of the war. Major battles, such as the Battle of Ia Drang in 1965 and the Battle of Khe Sanh in 1968, became symbolic of the war's brutality. These battles showcased the intense and often chaotic nature of the conflict, leaving a lasting impact on all who were involved. Section 5. A Nation Divided, Anti-War Sentiment and the Tet Offensive. As the war dragged on, American public opinion began to shift. The mounting casualties, the horrific images broadcast on television, and the seemingly endless conflict fueled a growing anti-war movement in the United States. Protests against the war erupted across the country. In January 1968, the Tet Offensive, a coordinated series of attacks by the North Vietnamese Army and the Viet Cong across South Vietnam, further eroded public support for the war. Although the offensive was a military defeat for the communists, it shocked the American public. It shattered the illusion that the U.S. was winning the war. The Tet Offensive marked a turning point in American public opinion. It intensified calls for peace and a negotiated settlement. Section 6. The Long Goodbye, Vietnamization, and the Fall of Saigon. In 1969, Richard Nixon became President of the United States. He promised to end American involvement in the Vietnam War. Nixon implemented a policy of Vietnamization. This aimed to gradually withdraw U.S. troops from Vietnam. It also sought to transfer the burden of fighting to the South Vietnamese Army. Despite the withdrawal of U.S. troops, the fighting continued. By 1973, the U.S. had signed the Paris Peace Accords with North Vietnam. This agreement officially ended America's involvement in the war. However, the accords did not bring peace to Vietnam. Fighting continued between North and South Vietnam. In 1975, North Vietnamese forces captured Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam. This marked the end of the Vietnam War and the reunification of the country under communist rule. Section 7. Scars of War. Vietnam's Long Road to Recovery. The Vietnam War had a devastating impact on Vietnam. The war resulted in the deaths of millions of Vietnamese people. It also caused widespread destruction and displacement. The war left behind a legacy of physical and psychological scars. The use of Agent Orange, a powerful herbicide by the U.S. military, had long-term environmental and health consequences. After the war, Vietnam faced numerous challenges. These included rebuilding its shattered infrastructure, healing its divided society, and overcoming the economic embargo imposed by the United States. Despite these difficulties, Vietnam embarked on a path of reconstruction and reconciliation. It has made significant progress in recent decades. Vietnam has transformed itself into a vibrant economy and an increasingly important player in Southeast Asia. Section 8. A Nation Divided, America grapples with the war's legacy. The Vietnam War had a profound impact on the United States. The war divided the nation, sparked social and political upheaval, and left lasting scars on the American psyche. The war's legacy continues to shape American foreign policy and public discourse. The war led to a loss of trust in the government. It also raised questions about the limits of American power. The experience of Vietnam continues to inform debates about the use of military force and the role of the US in the world. The Vietnam War also had a significant impact on American culture. It inspired countless books, films, and songs that reflected on the war's complexities and its enduring legacy. Section 9. Reflections on a Conflict. The enduring significance of the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was a pivotal event of the 20th century. It continues to hold significant relevance in the 21st century. The war offers important lessons about the human cost of conflict, the complexities of international relations, and the enduring power of ideas. The Vietnam War reminds us of the importance of understanding history, learning from the past, and striving for a more peaceful future. It also highlights the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity. The Vietnam War, despite its tragic consequences, also serves as a testament to the power of reconciliation, forgiveness, and the enduring hope for a better tomorrow.